Hi, my name's Kate and I am a high school math teacher in the middle of my 17th year of teaching. So I thought today that I would create a short video showing you guys how I teach trig to my geometry students. I know that's one of the things that a lot of students, when I hear, our parents say, oh, trig, that was the hardest thing that I learned. And then I have a lot of people say, oh my gosh, that was the easiest thing. So I just thought that I would share with you guys the way that I go through things, kind of my process, in hopes that maybe it will help you if you have to teach trig to your students. So the first lesson that I teach my students, we don't actually jump in to solving for sides, solving for angles right away the first day. We simply focus on the vocabulary and the formulas. So I start by putting up, I just have a real big magnetic right triangle. I have a few different ones, one that goes the other way, and then I'll turn them around. But we talk about the Pythagorean theorem, the different vocabulary that they knew from that. And then I introduce them to theta. So I have them draw it, I have them write what theta is, and then we talk about, it's an angle, so we put it in the angle. And then we start focusing on just labeling the three sides, because I find that a lot of my students struggle just knowing where the sides are, and they're struggling knowing that a lot of it's based on the angle that we're given. So we spend some time, okay, there's my hypotenuse, and I always talk about find your right angle, find the side that does not touch your right angle, that's your hypotenuse. And then we talk about let's find the opposite. So I say, okay, this side and this side touch the angle that we're looking at, that touch our theta. So what's the side that doesn't touch our theta? That's our opposite. And then the adjacent is the one that's left. And then we also talk about what those words mean. Opposite, if the playground is on the opposite side of the street from your house, it's not touching the street your house is on. So we talk about that. If we talk about, the candy store, the ice cream store is adjacent to your house, it means it's next to your house. So adjacent is attached to that angle. So we talk a lot about that. And then I will ask, okay, so if I move my angle up here, and that's why I like these magnetic pieces rather than writing things on the board, I can easily manipulate. So then we talk about which things change, and then I'll rotate the triangle and we'll go through that. We'll spend quite a bit of time just focused on this itself. After the students complete the sort and we go over it and we talk about it, then we start introducing the three different trig ratios, and we talk about what they mean. So we talk with sine, we talk about how it's the opposite and the hypotenuse, and they fill out a toolkit where they list, okay, I need to have an angle, I need to either know the opposite or the hypotenuse, and I'm trying to find the opposite or the hypotenuse. So we go through that for all three. As the students are writing them on their paper, I'm putting them up here. And the way that I have this designed is I have it color-coded. I find color coding really helps, especially in geometry. I talk a lot about that with my students. So when we're looking at this and talking through problems, they can see, ooh, it's pink and orange. So which one do I need? Pink and orange over here. And again, I'm encouraging them to use the vocabulary instead of just the colors, but just that color sometimes really helps them. So we go through this, they write these down. Now, I did put an Instagram story up, so it's gone by the time you guys see this, but I'm not one of the teachers that teaches using SOH-CAH-TOA. I never learned that in high school, and anytime I show it to my students, and I show it to them because I do know that a lot of teachers, at least in my district, use it, but most of the time when I show it to them, I spell it wrong, and then I have to fix it. So I would love to know in the comments below, is SOH-CAH-TOA a method that you guys use to help your students learn and remember the trig ratios, or do you just have them memorize it, maybe using a different technique? I would love to know. I don't have a trick for this, I just constantly have these up, and we're constantly, okay, sine, opposite over hypotenuse, tangent, opposite over adjacent. So we're constantly saying those ratios as we use them. After we talk about the vocabulary, then my students in their groups are given a set of 16 cards where all they're doing is they're sorting it, sorry about the glare, based on whether it's opposite, hypotenuse, or adjacent. So they're going to look at the card, and I explain it beforehand, so the angle that we're going to look at is this one right here, and we're going to talk about this side. So that's the hypotenuse, so put in the hypotenuse. And then here, and so I encourage the kids, because you can move these around, maybe make it look more like a quote-unquote normal triangle, right? A lot of our students think this is what a normal triangle looks like rather than this, and they can look, oh, that's opposite, and so they continue sorting these. So I find that this sort is really helpful for the students just to get a little bit of extra practice. This sort is in my TPT store, so I will leave a link for this. The kids have 16 different sides to sort. You can have them do all 16, you can cut them down and do less than that, but I think it's a really great activity, especially for our students who struggle a little bit more with learning. So I will again leave a link for this resource in the description box below. After we talk about what the 3 trig ratios are, then my students get this worksheet right here and we go through some of the problems together. So here's what number 1 looks like, and I have this projected up on the board. And what I do is I make the students, and actually I've changed it this year based on what some of my students requested and said would be more helpful. But as I project it, I'll use my magnets and we will put a theta in the angle, so it's asking tangent of z. So we talk about, okay, so that's looking at where the angle z is, so we're going to put our theta here. And then I have them label all 3 sides, so that's different than my answer key, but we would have labeled our hypotenuse, our opposite, and our adjacent. And I find that that has been helping the students, again, get more of that practice. And then what we do is we look, okay, I want tangent. So we look at our 3 formulas and realize, oh, tangent is opposite and adjacent, so we don't want hypotenuse. So then they cross out hypotenuse, and then they're like, okay, this is what I have left, and then we practice setting those up. So that's the only thing that we do on day 1. We focus on the vocabulary of our triangle. We focus on what the formulas are, not how to solve them. We just practice setting them up. So we spend some time, we do a couple together as a class, and then I have the students work on some of them on their own. We go over them and we're done. And that is it. We have not touched a calculator. We haven't done anything about actually solving these problems. And then for homework, the students get a maze. So I will link this maze in the description box below. This is not one of my resources, and it's very similar to the classwork. The only thing that's a downfall to this, and some of my students struggled with it, was so when we do cosine of A is going to be 27 over 45. So the students are going to have to reduce their answers, but not all of them are reduced completely. So I told my students, I want you to write down the ratio because that's the important thing, and then to find your answer, change those to decimals. So this is a great activity. I have been using it for years and years, but I do think that I'm going to create something a little bit different where they don't have to reduce, since that's not something that they need to do when they're actually solving for the sides. But again, that's all I do on the first day. It's really focusing on opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse, and setting up those ratios. Day 2 of Trig starts out very different for my students. I have them take out their toolkit so that they have the trig ratios, and I have them up on the board. And then I give them this sort. This is a sort from Mrs. E Teaches Math, so I will link this in the description box below as well. And I give them just very brief instructions. So I show them up on the board, and I actually look at number 2 only because number 1 has X for an angle, and so we're going to look at this one just so I can help explain it to the kids a little bit more based on what we talked about in class. So I say, okay, we have an angle here. We have this side X, we have this side 5, and I want to know which of those trig ratios we would use to find X. I don't want to find this one because there's nothing there. I want to find X. And so with your team, you guys need to decide, would we use sine, cosine, or tangent? And wherever you think that it goes, you're going to drop it in that spot. And you're going to sort all of these. Most of them are triangles, but some of them, there are 3 that have the trig ratios. So I say there are some that are going to be really easy. Maybe go find those first. And that's what I have the students do first. That second day. I haven't specifically talked to them about how to do this, but most students wind up, as I'm going around, this is the one time where even the kids that weren't really working or don't really pay attention or maybe are sleeping are working together, because I tell them you cannot just split it up, you take 5, you take 5. Everybody needs to be looking at the same one at the same time, and that really encourages them to talk together, and it's amazing how well they really do work together on this. And then we'll go over the answers, but not necessarily all at one time. So after they're done with the sort, I will pull up, I think I start with number 15. And we talk about, okay, so what are some of the things that you looked at when you decided how we would sort this? And they said, oh, we found the angle. Good, so that's our 30, that's our theta. So we mark that just so we know, okay, that's the angle we're looking at. And then I said, okay, well, what else did you do? They said, oh, well, we labeled our 3 sides, and they talked, okay, hypotenuse, there's our adjacent, there's our opposite. And then they're like, yeah, well, we knew we didn't need to use Then the student said, well, we know we don't need to use the adjacent because there's nothing there, so we have hypotenuse and opposite left. So we decided, well, if it's opposite and hypotenuse, that belongs in sine. So the students really walk us through how to do this. I never tell them how to do it specifically, but they're able to use their prior knowledge and a little bit of common sense to figure it out. And then we walk through how to solve this one together. And I have the students just do this on separate paper. Then we move to number 5. And my students always laugh at me because, you know, we're doing a real good job of counting. I'm like, yep, we're not going to go 1 through 20 on here or whatever. Yeah, we're not going to go 1 through 20. We're just going to do a couple. So then we have them draw this one, and we do kind of go through that same process. Now, the reason why I like to do this one after we do number 15 is because both of them are sine. This one has x on the bottom, whereas this one has x on the top. And I like that because it shows the students, hey, x does not always go on the top or always on the bottom. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions, is students think that for sine, x always goes on the top or always goes on the bottom, rather than always putting your opposite on top and hypotenuse on the bottom. So I like to do one of each right away so the students understand that. And then we do, I believe we jump into maybe number 3. So then we look at a cosine example, and then we do number 2 as a class so that they can see a tangent. So by the time that we've gone through 4 examples, we've looked at 1 example of each, and they've seen 2 where the x is on top and 2 where the x is on the bottom. And then I pick out a couple other problems that I want the students to work on with their team, and they work on that together. One of the things that I found helpful when my students are solving these problems. So first, as I talked about, I want them to label their sides. So I have them find the hypotenuse first, so right angle. So this is our hypotenuse. This is the angle that we're looking at. So the side that doesn't touch our angle, that's my opposite. And then the one that's left is our adjacent. After the students set this up, then we say, okay, which one doesn't have a number or a letter by it? That's our hypotenuse. So we're going to cross that one out, or we're going to erase that one. So we don't want that. So we're looking at opposite and adjacent. So we have tangent. When I have my students set up their ratios, rather than just writing tangent of 42 equals x over 5, I have them change this into a proportion. So I have my students write tangent of 42 over 1 equals x over 5. And the reason for this is when I set this up, I have so many students that just as I'm saying, okay, we're going to do this, and they're like, oh yeah, then we cross multiply. And I'm like, genius. If we had just written it like this, and I show them that, and I tell them, okay, this is why. If we just wrote this, and I said, okay, how would you solve? They're like, I don't know. And that's exactly it. So I make this into problems that they already understand how to solve, and then it becomes easier for them. So this is one of my tricks that I find to be really helpful for students, and I tell them that's just because tangent of 42 is just a number, so I can put it over 1 and it doesn't change anything. So if your students are struggling understanding when they're multiplying and dividing, maybe setting it up as a proportion and then they can cross multiply will help them. And that's also another great review of solving proportions. Even though we're not doing a lot during that second class period, I feel like between the sort and going through several of those examples, that really takes up a lot of the time in class, which is great, but there's a lot of conversation that happens in the class, and I think that it's such a good class, and I'm not cramming too much in. I know a lot of class periods we do so much. Trig is one of the times where I'm really slowing down because I want to make sure they get it. The homework that the students do is this who found it, and they're just solving for sides. I talked to them during the sort and said, hey, look, number 1 has x for an angle. That means that we're looking for the angle. We're going to learn how to do that later. But I give them this who found it. And the one that I gave them only has 9 questions, so it's a little bit shorter than the other ones. And the students work on practicing. The thing that I like about these mysteries that I make is that they really are self-checking. So the students are going to solve number 1. When they get the answer, they're going to look on the other side and figure out, oh, I got the answer of 9.23. So I know that this missing homework, if we read this, Tegan Teal is missing her homework and she needs to find it, and somebody must have found it. Who, where, when was it found? So it's like the game Clue, you know, Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick. That seems to always be the example I give the kids when I explain how to do these. But they really like them because they know that they get the answers right, because if the answer's on here, the answer's right. If they don't find their answer on here, they know they made a mistake and they go back and they try it again. So this is, as of the filming of this video, it's not available on my TPT store, but as soon as it is, I will be sure to put a link for this in the description box below. I do have other mysteries for other topics, and they're a really fun way to get the students to practice. There are 4 different versions, a version that only has 6 questions, 9, 12, and 15 questions. So if this looks like an activity your students might like, I will leave a link for all of my mysteries below as well, so you can check those out. So that's all we do on day 2. Very simple. By the end of that, even my kids that have been struggling with a lot of the other concepts typically feel like, oh my gosh, I completely understand this, or very much understand this, and I finally understand something in geometry, and they leave the class feeling really good. And that makes me really excited. On my day 3 of Trig, we just use that as a review day. So we go through another 2 examples as a class, just as a reminder. Remember, hey, this is how we did these, especially because we're on a block schedule. So with some of my classes, I may have seen them Friday and I won't see them again until Wednesday. So there's that big chunk of time between. So going over just a quick review is great. And then my students get, now I printed it out, but they get this digital copy of this activity from Busy Miss BB, and I will be sure to put this on Canvas, in my description below. But it comes with a digital Google Sheets activity where the students are going to enter their answer. If it's correct, it turns green, part of the picture appears. If it's wrong, nothing happens. The other thing that I really like is that it comes with a paper copy as well for the students to show all of their work. This worked really well as well. If a student forgot their iPad or their Chromebook, or it's not working, it's not charged, whatever the excuse is, they don't have an excuse. They can still do the assignment because it's right here. This did not take my kids the entire period. We have a 90-minute block. They took maybe 30 minutes to complete this. Some of my struggling students may have taken 45 minutes. And when they were done with that, they worked on their homework. The homework that I have the students do is a maze. I like mazes because they're self-checking, and the students, again, know that they have the right answer, they don't have the right answer. So here's the maze that they're doing, and this maze is from Amazing Mathematics. Again, if I can find this, any of these resources that I show you, if they're available on TPT, I'll be sure to link those below. This maze is great. It's really focusing on just finding the sides, which is what we've been practicing. So after we've spent time really focusing a whole class period on vocabulary, we spent 2 class periods on solving for sides only. The next class period, they're going to take a very short quiz, and the quiz is really just focusing on, can you set those up? Can you solve real basic ones? I have 6 questions on there, so making sure that they can show me that they understand the different ratios and when does x go on top, when does x go on the bottom, and how to solve for those. So a real short quiz, and then we jump into the inverse trig functions. So we talk about those, we talk about how to solve them, and I really just go into, okay, we're doing the opposite, right? Just like we would solve an equation, the inverse of adding is subtracting, the inverse of dividing is multiplying. So the inverse of sine is the inverse of sine, and we talk about that and how to solve those problems. The students find inverse so much easier, and part of that is because they don't have to, when they set up their ratios, they don't have to cross multiply, they don't have to remember, wait, am I multiplying, am I dividing? It's just really the same process over and over again. So it's nice to end the unit, well, close to ending the unit, on something that's a little bit easier. And for the homework, I give them another maze by Amazing Mathematics. that the students will complete. And I find that that's been very helpful. Now, because of the timing of the activity and this unit, my students will have one day the week of Thanksgiving. So that's kind of where we are right now. We're going to have one day before Thanksgiving. And so what I have my students do is a color by number activity where they are finding sides and angles. So it's just a mixture of everything. And it has 12 questions that the students work on. And again, it's practicing finding sides and angles. So we talk a little bit before this, okay, how do you know when you're going to use inverse? How do you know when you're going to use the regular formulas? And we go through that a little bit. And because this is just before Thanksgiving, the three options that the students have to color are a turkey, and they've got two different options for leaves. And then when the students are done coloring, I have them cut them out, and then I hang them up on my bulletin boards, and it really makes a lot of fun decoration for my class. If I do this after Thanksgiving, I do have a winter one as well that might be one of my absolute favorite designs. So here is a ugly Christmas sweater with trees and presents on it. I have one that is not Christmas related, so just an ugly winter sweater with frosty and it's snowing. And then I have, he's a little frightening, but I have a little Santa Claus. And these are a lot of fun. The kids get a kick out of coloring these ugly sweaters. So if you are doing trig and you're looking for a fun activity for your kids, if it's around Thanksgiving time, so right around now, you can pick up the Thanksgiving version, or you can pick up the Christmas ugly sweater version. I do have a variety of these for trig, whether it's sides only, whether it's both side and inverse, for a couple of the different holidays. So again, I will leave those in the description below. The last thing that we do in the unit is trig applications, so talking about story problems, trying to show them where they may use these in real life. So I have just 3 examples that we go through together as a class, go through the stories, talk about some of the vocabulary, and then the students will work on a couple examples for homework, so they've got 6 of them. Because they don't take as long, they have a lot of time to work on those in class, which is really nice. They can work together, they can help each other, they can ask for help. The last thing that I do in the unit before we review and test is a trig application project. I've been doing projects at the end of each of my units, and it's a fun way to have my students show off their art side, because I am in what we call the School of Arts and Communications. So my students are interested in pursuing something in the art field or the communications field. Now that may be music, that may be some other things, but a lot of my students are ridiculously talented at drawing. So I try to capitalize on that in my projects as much as possible. So this project here, I got the idea from Lindsay Bowden. I will link her blog below, the blog post about this, but my students are to create a word problem that deals with trig, whether it's finding a side, whether it's finding an angle, and then they're going to create a poster, and the poster is going to have the story problem on the top of it, and then they need to draw a picture that represents the situation. And then on a separate sheet of paper, I give them a half sheet of paper, they're going to solve and make the answer key that they're going to tape to the back of the poster. So they're not solving anything on the front of the poster. That way, for part of my review, I hang up a lot of the posters. Now, I have 120 kids, so I can't hang them all up. But I find some that have a good variety of finding sides, finding angles, and using the different ratios, and I'll hang them up around the room. And then as part of the review, my students will do a gallery walk, and they will walk around and they will solve a variety of the problems that are up that their classmates, that their schoolmates created. And they really enjoy that because it's not me making them, and they have really cool pictures to look at. And they, again, like I said, they're ridiculously talented. So I'll insert here after this clip a couple of my projects from last year just to show you guys how amazing they did at this project. After the project, we review, We take the test and that's it. So I hope that this video was helpful for you guys, kind of showing how I pace out teaching trig, because again, I know it's one of the things that students and teachers maybe find a little bit harder to do, but I find that this taking the time and really spending time working on the vocabulary at the beginning helps solidify their understanding throughout the entire unit. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments below, or leave comments. I'd love to know, are there things that you do differently? Are there things that you would do differently? Leave those in the comments below, and I'd love to start conversations. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in following along more with my journey of teaching high school math, please subscribe. I do upload videos every Friday, so hit the notification bell to be notified when my next video comes up. I hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.